Millie Craig has been a fire and ambulance dispatcher for 9 years in the small town of Kingwood, Texas. In that time, she's handled almost every kind of emergency call imaginable. On July 1st, 1989, for the first time, Millie handled a dispatcher's worst nightmare.
I was working the morning shift, the Saturday of the 4th of July weekend, and like most Saturdays, the first half of the shift was extremely slow.
At her home a mile away, Millie's son David was visiting from out of town with his fiancée, Cynthia Damel.
I get up, go outside, and Dad normally cuts the front yard first, but he'd cut the back. So he came over and sat down, so we were sitting in lawn chairs, and then Cynthia came outside. So we're just talking about whatever, my new job, or Cynthia might get married or something. I mean, there was so much happening, we couldn't help but be excited about it. I wasn't really looking at him, I was kind of in thought. And I heard his glass of water drop, and he went into what I explained as a series of seizures.
Ovie Craig's heart had stopped beating.
Dan?
Millie was the only dispatcher on duty that morning.
Okay, yes, dispatch? Mrs. Craig. Mrs. Craig, is something. David.
He's having a stroke or a heart attack or something.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right, goodbye.
Mike, you got a call. It's at my house.
She had to remain at her post.
At the very end of the phone call, the personal emotion started to hit me. I think my heart probably dropped into my stomach.
Cross Street Fairwood Village Drive. We need another dispatch at the station immediately.
I couldn't leave until another dispatcher showed up. We have 36,000 people out here. Somebody else could have had a problem.
Kathy Splendido and her husband had just finished breakfast when Millie's call of a possible cardiac arrest came over their pagers.
There was an intensity in her voice that I had never heard before in 9 years. And I thought, it's somebody we know. My heart was going a mile a minute because it takes a really gutsy person to stand ground when she knows that her husband is home, maybe dying.
I had to know if he had a pulse or not, because if you're going to do CPR, then you better need it. It's very, very dangerous to do CPR on someone whose heart's going, because you can just stop it doing CPR. I mean, you're compressing the heart against the backbone. It's time, and you know it's time, and you lean over, and you're fixing to do CPR on a human being, and he felt cold, and he had all the signs. The eyes were way back in his head, turning purple, and his muscles were still contracted. I mean, but they don't tell you about all that. They don't tell you that it's going to be rough on you.
I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know how serious it was, but I knew it was serious from David's tone of voice when he was yelling into the phone. It was beginning to sink into me that he may be dead. And, there was nothing I could do.
David did the CPR, and I was just standing there watching, and it was weird because you could see Mr. Craig, the violent motions had stopped. He lay very still, and at that moment, I got the vision of him in a coffin, and it really scared me.
Paramedics Neil Botting and Mike Lagudas had been at the station when Millie got the call.
Normally, you don't treat one cardiac any different than you do another, but the situation with this one being the person that I knew, there were a lot of things going through my mind. Were we going to be able to reverse the problem and bring him back? And the other thing that was going through my mind is what if we didn't? Upon arrival at the back of the house, we found David performing CPR on his dad, and we quickly reassessed Mr. Craig's vital signs and determined that he did not have a pulse and he was not breathing.
I raced up to the station and went in and said something sweet like, "Millie, go home." And she left. And then I sat down at the console and dispatched the location once more. Mike Lagudas was the paramedic on duty. When he heard my voice as opposed to Millie's voice, then and only then did he announce that CPR was in progress, because he didn't want to say that while she was sitting at the console.
CPR in progress. CPR in progress.
We continued CPR until we set up our defibrillator. Upon taking the reading through the paddles, we determined that Mr. Craig was in ventricular fibrillation and delivered a shock of 200 joules, which is the minimum starting delivery for an adult who's in cardiac arrest. I had the big fear that he wasn't going to make it, and I didn't quite know how I was going to deal with that with respect to Millie being such a close friend, her husband being such a close friend, and being able to tell her this.
He went out of defibrillation, and he went into a very slow idioventricular rhythm, and it did not generate a pulse. So CPR was resumed while we got set to start an intravenous line and start to administer some cardiac drugs.
It had been more than 5 minutes since Ovi's heart had stopped beating.
We, at that point, saw what was a treatable rhythm with additional CPR and medications. So things were looking up at that point.
When I walked up the drive, David was walking down the drive to meet me and said something like, "You don't want to go up there." And I said, "Yes, I thought that I did."
Say 1, 2, 3, let's go up. Okay.
I'm not sure at what point I realized that they had shocked his chest, and I don't know at what point I knew that they had done CPR.
Now let's go ahead and elevate it.
And he was sort of looking around, and his eyes were all red, bloodshot. And I spoke to him, and he sort of looked at me, but I knew he didn't see me.
11 minutes after his devastating heart attack, O.V. was fully conscious.
He just woke up. That's a hard concept for me, because Cynthia and I witnessed the brutal part of it. I mean, watching a human being fight for life. And his heart stopped. He went to the hospital. They did the heart catheterization. He's laying in the hospital. That's nothing. Looking at his eyes and not seeing anybody looking back is the part that they don't ever tell you about. And that night, they said, "Well, y'all can go home." And I said, "Well, I can't." So I spent the night. Here I'd saved his life. I knew it. The doctors had told me. But I knew it. And I wanted to make sure that I knew that he was okay.
54-year-old O.V. Craig's sudden death heart attack caused no muscle damage to his heart. With medication, he can lead a normal life.
You kind of like for your child to feel a little indebted to you as he grows up, and you want him to feel a little, my father did this for me, and he did that for me, and he does feel that way. But then all of a sudden, the situation turns, and now I owe him a life. If my son had not done the CPR, or Cynthia had not made the call, my wife dispatched the paramedics, I would have had no chance at all. I am so grateful, because it's the difference in living and dying. I even asked one time, "Well, what do you do with a debt like that?" And they said, "Well, be prepared to save someone else."
If somebody asks me, why would I take CPR? I'd say, well, you got a really easy choice. You can take CPR and have a tool to where you could save someone's life. If you don't, then you can watch them die. I mean, you can just sit there and sob with them and oh, you're sincere and you're really sorry, but they're going to lay there and they're going to die.
If David hadn't been home, I would have come home and found O.V. dead in the afternoon, because he was clinically dead.
It puts it all in perspective for you. I mean, I gave my dad a hug, whenever I'd come home anyway. But now I give him a hug. And I can't.
If you are interested in learning CPR, contact the nearest chapter of the American Red Cross. Next.